Hello and welcome back to Down to the Tyre. Today I'm joined by a driver who came from a racing family growing up in South Africa before getting the call up to GB4. This led him to progress to the GB3 Championship, where he raced in his second season this year with Elite Motorsport. Coming sixth in the championship, this was a brilliant result, but it wasn't as high as he'd hoped for, after many factors which were out of his control limited his results on some occasions. However, there are plenty of positives since this was a big step up from P9 in the championship last year. The driver I'm talking about is of course Jarrod Waberski, so I hope you enjoy the episode. Jarrod, you competed in GB3 this year with Elite Motorsport. Now the season's over, how would you summarise it as a whole? I know you've said already over on your Instagram that quite a few things happened that were out of your control that maybe limited your results on certain occasions, but P6 in the championship, it's a step up from where you finished last year. Does it still feel like a big achievement to come that high?
Yeah, obviously, like you say, we're a little bit disappointed with how the season went. I think going into pre-season, I mean, our pace as a whole team, all three of us were really incredible. I still think we had really good pace throughout the year. We just got really unlucky in, the moments where you need to have a bit of luck. And unfortunately, GB3 is like one of those championships where qualifying is like super important. So we had a few rounds where we'd had an issue in qualifying, and that's pretty much three races down the drain. And when you're trying to fight, in the top three for the championship, once you have one bad weekend, that's really it. So, so yeah, I think to finish P6 with the amount of issues that we had that literally neither me or the team could really control, I think was still a really good achievement. It's just a little bit heartbreaking.
As you mentioned, Elite had such good pace across the team this year. What was it like to be part of a team that were competing for, podium spots, race wins, and a team that were capable of fighting for the championship, as you said?
Yeah, obviously getting on with the team, we clicked really well. Did one test day with them last year in November. And that kind of after that test day at Silverstone, I kind of just knew that we wanted to race with them just purely because obviously we were fast, but how we clicked with the team and my journey in the UK started with Elite quite a few years ago. Not with any racing, but a test day in Genettas. So just kind of like feeling like returning home almost. So it was quite nice to do the season with them. It's just, yeah, really unfortunate that we couldn't get the result that we deserved.
Absolutely. When you look back at the season as a whole and all the different rounds, what for you kind of are the standout moments as moments that you're really proud of, and the moments where maybe it's more of a what could have been?
Yeah, I'd say Spa was definitely, I say Alton Park and Spa were probably, and actually Zandvoort is probably the biggest what could have been. I mean, we went there and, I mean, just dominated testing really all the way up to qualifying. And then it kind of rained. We were qualifying early in the morning and it rained quite early on. And yeah, we had something go wrong in qualifying and literally ended up qualifying right towards the back and then had to go from pretty much at the back of the grid to, within the top 10, across all three races, which I think if we were, in the top five even, which still would have, I think we would have classed as a pretty bad qualifying with just how testing went. So yeah, that weekend I think will forever stay with me as being a really heartbreaking weekend. I say the Silverstone round was a really good weekend for us. I think that was a weekend where we kind of, as a team, made quite a big step forward because we were struggling a little bit earlier on with kind of on the grippier conditions with the newer tyre compound that Pirelli brought out. So Silverstone, I think, was a really good weekend for us. Obviously, we were on the podium, really good in qualifying. All three cars were, well within the top six, I think it was. So I think that weekend is definitely a standout weekend.
Absolutely. And I guess is a difficult one, isn't it, when things happen that are out of your control. But do you look back on it on the season fondly, or are you looking forward now and kind of ready to move on to whatever you've got coming up?
Yeah, so I obviously had a month I stayed in the UK after the race season ended to kind of just, chat to people and try and figure out what we're going to do for next year. And that was kind of my review process, you could say. And, you go and look round by round by round. And it is kind of a bit heartbreaking when you look each round about how good it was going and then what went wrong. And then you look at the rounds that went really well. So yeah, it's hard to go back and look throughout a season, obviously when you've had some tough moments, but it's a super important process to just getting better because you can always improve. So that's like one of the main areas as a driver.
When you look back at kind of the things that you can pinpoint that you've learned this season, obviously I know a lot of the things that went wrong weren't in your control. There wasn't really much you could have done about certain things, but when you look back, are there any moments that you think I really learned from that, and that's something that I can bring forward to future seasons in racing?
Yeah, I think I think every driver experiences those moments every weekend, I think, because for it to all go perfect on a race weekend, I think is nearly impossible, really. Even if you're winning races, there's something you've done wrong as well. So I think going back to each race, I mean, we do it after each race weekend, after each session, really, we do a review process. So you're just constantly learning as a driver. So, if I look back at my season this year compared to my season last year, just simple things you don't even think about just naturally improve just because, you've been training on them in the background and it just becomes natural, really. So I think the learning process is just very important. Step by step is one of the biggest things.
I was going to ask about that. Obviously, it being your second season, not being a rookie anymore. What do you think? How do you think you went into it kind of differently with a different mindset when you're obviously more used to a lot of the tracks? I obviously know GB3 did go to a few new tracks this year as well, but most of the tracks you were familiar with. What's that like, kind of going into a season, kind of knowing what to expect almost?
Yeah, I think being a second year driver kind of just helps give you that a little bit more confidence. It's the biggest thing. You've had a year racing the car, you know how the starts work, kind of how the cars race, because like I said, it's a very much qualifying championship. So, you learn coming from like an F4 type of car to a GB3, the downforce is a lot different. So you learn to race differently with the dirty air and stuff like that. So kind of in your first season, you spend first two rounds trying to figure all that out, and that can kind of sometimes cost you, at the end, in the end season results. So yeah, the bigger thing is just confidence going into the second season.
You mentioned obviously stepping from an F4 car, you're in GB4. With GB3, there's so many drivers coming from so many different routes. You've obviously got some who are coming straight from Ginetta Juniors, some coming from British F4, some from GB4. For you, do you feel like coming from GB4 to GB3, do you think that path really strengthened your progression there, kind of following kind of like I guess the logical ladder of the series with GB4 being the closest thing to a feeder series to GB3?
Yeah, I think so. GB4, I think for me was the biggest year in my career, I'd say, because that whole season was literally not planned. I got a phone call 5 days before the first race to come and do it. Got on a plane and flew over and did the race. So, doing no preseason testing, that GB4 year, I'd rock up on the Thursday, learn the track, and then race that weekend and then fly back home. So that season was definitely a big breakthrough season. And I learned so much because you're on the same weekends as GB3, racing the same tracks, practically the same format. The races are just a bit longer in GB3. So everything that I learned in GB4 just made the step to GB3 a lot easier. Like I didn't have to learn so much. All I had to really focus on learning was just kind of the car, which with the testing, you kind of get to grips with quite quickly. So GB4, I think for anyone, if doing GB4 going to GB3 would have massive gains. Because, you look at different other championships, even like British F4, which is in the UK as well. They do different tracks compared to GB3. So if you're not able to do a lot of testing, it can make it quite difficult.
Absolutely. And we know, obviously, as we've already mentioned, GB3 went to a few new tracks this year, a lot that were outside of the UK. How did you kind of find those tracks? Did you have any prior experience of any of them, or were you kind of discovering those for the first time? And if so, how did you find getting used to those ones?
Yeah, so obviously we did was Spa, Zandvoort, and Hungary. Spa and Zandvoort were done previously last year, and that was my first time going to them. In Spa last year, I think we had one test day before the race, so I kind of done one test day and then gone to the race weekend. Then Zandvoort last year had no test days, so it was literally rock up the week before. I think we had a Wednesday test, so a half day test or something like that, and we then just straight into the race weekend. So it makes it quite hard. So that makes the preparation away from the track, on the simulators and stuff like that, really important because we can't really just go and test all these European tracks. Like next year they're adding Monza, which is another add-on. So it's good for the championship that they're adding more European tracks because it's just for us as drivers, we get to learn all these F1 tracks, even for other championships that race them as well. So yeah, it's really good for GB3 to be adding all these newer tracks.
I feel like as well, GB3, especially as it's been expanding more and more to Europe, as you said, kind of adding one new circuit this year and another new one next year. I feel like it's getting a lot more recognition globally now, with a lot of drivers stepping up to FIA F3 from it and doing really, really well as they progress. Do you think it is the addition of the European circuits that has helped the progression to FIA F3 kind of become what I'd say is becoming quite an established kind of path on the ladder now?
Yeah, I'd say GB3 is, well, I mean, anyone I've spoken to, it's probably literally one of the best cars you can drive. Just how the car is, just how it's designed, and it's really lightweight. It's a really good car. It's got quite a lot of downforce to its, power ratio, plus the tracks, and plus the budget, really, compared to some other stuff. So it just made it a really attractive championship to do and learn. And like you say, it's proven from guys that have gone from GB3 to go to F3 straight away and do really well. Even F2, really. We've seen people make the jump from GB3 to F2 and do really well. So it just proves the standard of GB3 and how much you learn in GB3.
Absolutely. Even with, as we said, some stepping up to F2, even Luke Browning doing an F1, FP1 in a few weeks' time, I feel like it has really established itself as what I'd say, especially for drivers based in the UK, a go-to route to get into F3 now. Absolutely. I wanted to ask about your teammates as well, because I actually spoke to one of your teammates, Hugo, in an episode that hasn't aired yet. By the time this one goes out, it will have done. So I wanted to ask about your relationship with your teammates. Obviously, in GB3, you have two teammates. What's that like, kind of the dynamic? Because obviously this year you were kind of in the middle with one driver who was a bit more experienced than you, I believe, if I've
Yeah.
calculated the years right, and then one who was a rookie. What was that like, kind of being in between the two?
Yeah, so it was quite a good year. I think this year as teammates, we all kind of clicked straight away. Um, yeah, obviously, I did the test that I did with Elite. Hugo was there end of last year, so that's the first time I met Hugo. And yeah, we kind of all three of us had just really clicked. We had a really good dynamic, and I think us being really close throughout the year helped us develop through, some areas where, as a team, we were struggling. Like we say, we some rounds we were, struggling quite a bit. So that's kind of where all three of us, plus the engineers, had to come together to find a solution, which is really important because, if it's a one-man team or a two-man team, it's just not possible. Because, like you say, Mackenzie had done, I think it was his third season this year, so he had a lot of experience. So I was still learning off him. And then Hugo was brand new into it. But also, we would go to some tracks and Hugo would be doing some stuff in some corners that, none of us had ever seen before. So it's really good to have three really good teammates, and it just helps bring the team to a different level.
I imagine, obviously, everyone always says like your biggest competition is your teammate. Your teammate is the driver or the drivers in this case that you want to beat. But I imagine having that good relationship, picking up things from, both of them, ultimately that does make you a better driver. Is there anything in particular you can kind of pinpoint that you learned from either of them that you'll take away into the future now, even when you're not teammates with them?
Yeah, I'd definitely say, like, obviously Mackenzie, I was in my second year, um, and I was still learning a lot of Mackenzie because he was in his third year. So I think, certain things that, he would bring on board and different techniques and stuff like that. Even Hugo, think for Hugo, it was quite a big learning curve coming straight from Genetas, doing no single seater stuff before, which it's a really big jump. So in the beginning, we were all kind of, every session sitting down with him and just giving little tips and stuff like that. And, you know, after the first few rounds, when he'd gotten used to how the racing works, you could see his progression. And kind of as a whole team, we all just went up another level. So I think, you know, having Mackenzie and Hugo there definitely helped me because there's quite a few things you always pick and point out because we all have different driving styles. And I'd say, some of us like the car quite differently. And then sometimes we might like it quite similar. So I think all around for all three of us, I definitely think we were all continuously learning throughout the year.
I want to take a step back to before you did GB3, before even you did GB4, really, because I want to talk about how you kind of got into karting in South Africa, which is where you are now currently. Um, you mentioned that the call up to GB4 was very sudden, which I didn't realize. What were you kind of doing before that? Like, where were you at that point in your racing career before you got that call to GB4?
Yeah, so obviously I started karting in South Africa when I was 4. Um, Obviously I got interested through my family because my dad used to race. My dad used to do British Formula 3. And he was racing here in South Africa and when I was, quite small and going to the track. So I was always interested and I started indoor go-karting. And then when I was kind of old enough to do my first race, I was kind of straight in it. So, and then won the cadet championship in 2013. I think it was my second year racing ever. Well, I'd done a year and a half. So, and then won national championship in karting in South Africa and 3 other regional championships on the way. Then I made the step up to Formula Ford. It's called InvestChem Formula 1600 here, which is kind of our Formula Fords are a little bit different where they have wings and slicks. So they're a little bit faster than like the Formula Fords in the UK.
Yeah.
So I think that helped me quite a lot. So I moved into that when I was kind of 14 going on 15 and then lockdown hit and we had a year of literally no racing here. So I pretty much just sat on the simulator for a year. So and then 2021 was my first season, full on racing and came second in that when I was 15. I think the guy that won was, I think, 20 or something. So it was quite a big jump and I learned quite a lot that year. And then our plan was to do another season in 2022 of Formula Fords, obviously to go for the championship after finishing second. And we had a disastrous first round. There's only 2 races a weekend.
Mhm.
And we got taken out in the first race while leading and then had a mechanical failure in the second race. So yeah, it was kind of a terrible start, not even scoring a single point. I think I had a point for fastest lap in the first race or something. That was it. And then, yeah, we got the call saying there was a GB4 race literally that next weekend. So my dad managed to get a visa in time, flew out on the Tuesday, landed Wednesday, drove to Snet, did my seat fit in the freezing cold, and yeah, got on track first time on Thursday, and yeah, got on the podium that weekend, and kind of got on the podium, and Kevin from Kevin Mills Racing said to me, "Well, the next round's in 2 weeks. Can you stay?" So we're like, "Well, okay, we'll stay and do the next one." And then yeah, I got my first win, and that kind of sealed the deal to do GB4. And that year, like I said before, I'd done 0 preseason testing. Even throughout the year, I didn't do any testing. I would fly up on the Monday evening, land Tuesday, do the race weekend, and then fly back the next Monday. So yeah, it was quite a busy year.
I can imagine, and obviously from a racing family as well. I imagine even though that must create kind of an understanding of what you're doing, which helps. Imagine it also must have still been quite challenging, kind of balancing all of that with your How did your family find it?
Yeah, so obviously, well, my mom wasn't really impressed at first, really, because we didn't really say anything, and we were like, "Okay, we're going to England," and she was like, "Oh, nice win," and then we said, "Okay, we're going now." So yeah, she wasn't really impressed when she found out about that, but obviously it is quite tough, like 2022, I was back and forth throughout the whole year, so it wasn't too bad. 2023, I'd be in the UK kind of 2 to 3 months at a time and come back for like 2, 3 weeks. Whereas this year I was there literally from February to at beginning of November. So I was there for about 9 months doing, racing. So I hadn't seen my family for quite a while. So it is quite hard being on, living on the other side of the world. But, coming from South Africa, it's something we have to do just because, I reached the limit of what I could do here when I was 15. So it's all the opportunities are all overseas.
I imagine, obviously, as well as a young racer, budget is always something you're having to keep in mind. I imagine when you're having to also move country to pursue those opportunities, I imagine that becomes even more complicated. Is that something you've also kind of had to face over the years and had to kind of navigate your way around?
Yeah, obviously, I think the budget is probably the biggest thing. I mean, like you said, well, we've been racing in the UK, or even if you just look at Euro, pounds, euros. So in our currency, the rand, it's it's 24 rand to £1. So, racing budget's expensive. So, for someone over there, then times it by 24 for us. So it's quite tough, and that's one of the biggest things coming from, outside of Europe or America or something like that, where the currency is a little bit weaker. So obviously the sponsorship work behind the scenes is kind of full on 24/7 really, because without that part of racing, I wouldn't be able to do it.
Definitely. And you mentioned that you started karting when you were 4. That's obviously very young, especially compared to Hugo, who started when he like
Yeah.
2022, when he was a teenager. I'm always intrigued to know who people's inspiration is when they kind of got into racing. But I imagine for you, it was your dad, right?
Yeah, yeah. So definitely say my dad. My grandpa had a team, throughout started in 1974, and that went on. They bowled a Formula 2 championship here in South Africa, and a Formula GTR championship here in South Africa. So that was quite a big thing for my dad, and my dad raced in that, and then went overseas to the UK and did Formula Renault in the UK and British Formula 3. So that obviously then he ended up budget funding, and that was kind of the biggest reason he stopped. So he came back to South Africa and just kind of started his own business and stuff like that. Then was just doing racing on the side, really, building his own cars and racing in historic championships and a bit of work for Mercedes and BMW and stuff like that. Then obviously when I was young, I was always going to watch, and it just sparked the interest straight away. So I spoke to my dad and was like, well, he said to me, he'll never make me want to do it. It always had to come from me. So he never took me to a kart track before I said I want to go. So that was the biggest thing for him, was just making sure I wanted to do it. So yeah, once I went for the first time, that was it.
From that young age, as soon as you kind of saw the track, saw the racing, were you instantly like, that's what I want to do?
Yeah, straight away. I mean, the first thing I really wanted to do actually was to race MotoGP. I was a massive Valentino Rossi fan, and I loved racing, loved cars and everything, but I was more into bikes when I was really younger. So I'd got a little mini pit bike, those little bikes for the kids and stuff like that. And I'd watched Rossi's crash in Mugello in 2010, I think it was, and where he broke his leg, and it was like quite a big crash, and that instantly kind of put me off bikes. I was like, I'm not interested in doing that anymore. So, and that was when I went to my dad. I think it was a day or two after that, and said, "Can I go try go-karting?" And that's where the bug bit.
Did you have to avoid any videos of any car crashes for like, because you were like, well, I've been put off from bikes, I can't be put off from cars as well.
Not really. So a funny thing, when I started, my dad kind of, yeah, obviously explained what it is and it's dangerous and stuff like that. And he had shown me some videos of, obviously I was quite young. He had shown me some videos of certain crashes and stuff like that, showing that this is the stuff you're getting into, and some of his crashes. And he's got some of his old karting overalls where he's been flown out the cart and they're all ripped to pieces. So he kind of, before I started, they went through the whole procedure of like, this is what can happen. You sure you want to do it? And yeah, that was it.
I feel like a lot of drivers, especially like drivers who are in series like Formula One and things like that, say that they just don't think about it while
Yeah.
they're driving. They don't think about the danger and stuff. Is that something you relate to as well?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the easiest way I can describe it is like, riding a bicycle. The slower you go, the more dangerous it is, I find. So it's like one of those things. If you think about what could happen or if I could crash or something like that, that's generally when something will happen because that's what you're focused on. If you're focused on the actual driving part and, you're doing everything correctly, the odds, of you going off are quite slim. There's always a chance. It's racing. There's always a chance something can happen. But when you're completely focused, that's kind of when you're more safe.
Yeah, definitely that makes sense. And when you were growing up, obviously seeing like, racing on the track, like, when you're actually at the track or just videos and stuff, were there any cars that were kind of like your dream to drive? Or was there anything where you were like, oh, I'd love to drive that one day? And how does that compare to how you feel now, at the stage you're at now? Like, are there any cars now that you look at thinking, oh, that's the dream?
Yeah, I'd obviously say, well, growing up watching Formula One, it was kind of when I was really young, kind of just the Vettel area where he was at Red Bull and kind of dominating for those 4 years. So when I was watching Formula One then, he was kind of my hero then. So watching him race, and I still go back now to some of his onboards, and I think one specifically in Singapore. Um, just seeing this the style that you needed to drive those type of cars, and obviously when I was younger, I didn't understand it as much. But going back to it now and watching those onboards and looking at the style that you had to use to be quick, I think is really quite inspiring. So I think if one day I could get to drive, one of those cars from 2010 to 2013, I think that would be quite a big dream come true.
That is the golden era, isn't it? Like that's also I started watching F1. Like it was about when Lewis Hamilton was kind of getting into it, being from the UK. Like that was when I
Yeah,
started to really pay attention to it. But the Vettel dominance is what I remember the most from that period. That type of car. It for me, like, I'd never seen anyone dominate like that in the sport
yeah,
because that was the first driver I'd seen do it. So I feel like you always kind of always remember the first time that you see something like that, I guess.
yeah, exactly. I think those 4 years will definitely stick with me forever.
Are there any other drivers that inspire you as much as Vettel? Anyone who's either who you've kind of like gone back and discovered since from maybe like before your lifetime, or anyone who you've just kind of discovered since who is doing it in the present day?
I'd say, well, obviously going back quite a while, obviously I think this is a common one among pretty much any racing driver is Senna really, is going and looking, you got the Senna documentary that's out. I've probably seen that 100 times. So yeah, watching that, and I think just obviously it's a different era and things were a lot different then. But just as a driver, I think he's kind of what we all want to be. So I think he's probably one of the most standout ones. I'd say currently at the moment, I'd say I think Verstappen is really impressive, just like especially this season, I think, being obviously not in the fastest car and still being able to win or consistently score really good points. I think that's like just shows how good he really is. So I think that's really impressive.
I agree with you. I think this year has been the year he's impressed me the most, even though it's maybe apart from 2021, I guess, maybe been the year he's been challenged the most in terms of the car just hasn't been what it has been in the past. I think he's handled it really maturely. The fact that he's not ever passed the blame or tried to, shove anyone under the bus for the way that the car has performed. Have you ever kind of been in a position before where you've known that the car isn't how you want it to be? And as a driver, how do you kind of approach that? How do you handle it, like in a mature way, I guess?
Yeah, I think, well, like I've done 2 seasons in GB3 and, well, fixed championships and stuff like that. Even going looking at GB4 and stuff like that. We're all in the same car, but they're not all the same. And I think you look at like Formula 3, all the guys are in the same car, but it's similar teams that are up the front. So I think a lot of people don't understand that they're not all the same. So I think when you're in a situation where it's not, the car's not reacting how you want or something like that, it's the only thing you can do is just work with your engineer as much as you can to get it to suit you. And that's where your teammates can come in handy as well because you've got data to compare to. Yeah, the biggest thing is just to focus what you can control because especially on a race weekend, you only have a few practice sessions and then you're straight into qualifying. So you don't have time to, mess around and stuff like that. You need to use every session to just try and, even if you can find 2 tenths, it's 2 tenths better than where you were, and that might be another few positions up the grid, if the weekend's not going too great. So I think it's the tough weekends that really make the difference in the end. So yeah, I think just focusing on what you control is the biggest thing.
If there was one thing you kind of wish people knew about like spec series, about the kind of single seater ladder, would it be that because I agree with you. I think a lot of people think, oh, all the cars are the same, but
Yeah.
we know they're not.
Yeah, I mean that's one of the biggest things, and obviously it comes down to the teams and how many drivers the teams have, and well, how long the team's been running in the certain championship because they'll have more experience and stuff like that. So there's a lot of different factors to it, and it's I think the spec series are one of the hardest ones to probably go and win because even though, like we say, the cars are not the same, they're still quite close in certain ways, which makes it really hard. So I'd say that's probably one of the biggest things, I think. And a lot of people are realizing more. I mean, not so much in GB3, I don't think, because it's not as bad. I think I think everyone's really close in GB3, really. I think if you're like one step behind, it makes quite a big difference. Where if you look at F3 or even F2 or Formula One, for example, you can really see the different stages, I call them, in team experience, team performance, stuff like that. So
Yeah, definitely. Finally, my kind of last question for you, I want to touch on the future a little bit. You've kind of teased on Instagram, when you were doing a bit of a review of the 2024 season, that now you're looking ahead to 2025, but nothing has been confirmed or revealed yet, as far as I've seen. So I was just wondering if there's anything at all you can say about 2025, the next season, what you've got coming up, and what you're looking forward to.
I mean, like I mentioned earlier, I spent a month, in the UK, kind of literally just speaking to, or just networking really, speaking to as many, and literally every week I just had meetings with, teams in literally any category you can think of. Because kind of when we did GB3, the mindset was all on, I just really spoke to GB3 teams, and we're still in talks with GB3 teams. But it's, we kind of, all our options are open really. So we said to ourselves this year, well, let's just go speak to people, if it's from GTs or LMP or, Porsches or whatever it is, touring cars or stuff like that. It's just, F3 stuff, and let's just speak to as many people and kind of get our name out there a little bit more, and kind of you get to know a bit more people, which can help. And you never know what opportunities could come. So yeah, at the moment, nothing's confirmed yet. I think we're getting closer. I think we should know, I'd say January time, end of January, obviously, definitely, I think beginning of Feb, everything should be finalized for next year. And yeah, I will be coming back to the UK because it's kind of my second home at the moment. So that's kind of all I have at the moment.
I love that. Well, I'll link your socials in the description so anyone who's listening can go and follow you, keep up to date with what does get announced when you are able to confirm early next year. But yeah, best of luck wherever you end up. Sounds like yeah, lots of doors potentially open, so it's very exciting.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, I really enjoyed it. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thanks for coming on the podcast.